All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. I'm your host for today, Jim Underdown. Before we get started, I just want to do a quick plug for the latest Point of Inquiry podcast. Go to pointofinquiry.org. I have a nice conversation with our old pal, Professor Richard Wiseman. We talk about the ancient art of cold reading, which is behind tarot cards and astrology and psychics and mediums and all kinds of stuff. If you really want to get some inside information about how all that stuff works, check it out on pointofinquiry.org for our latest episode. Now, today, first of all, by the way, if you want to submit a question later on, while Bertha's talking or later on in the episode here, hit your Q&A button. This will not happen on chat. It'll happen on Q&A. So that's how you get your questions in. So today we're going to be talking about teaching climate change. But since I'm sitting here in Los Angeles right now, I just want to throw in a quick 2 cents about this. As some of you may have heard, there's been some fires out here over the past month, and arguably the intensity of those fires and the fact that the recent drought has caused it and caused the very heavy winds that fan those flames to a point that no fire department would ever be able to keep up with it, was caused by climate change. That the Santa Ana winds are more intense, that we didn't get any rain for 6 months, where normally we would expect to get rain in November and December and January. All these things can be related to climate change. So what we're talking about here today has real effects, and tens of thousands of people are out of their homes in Southern California because of this. And it ain't going to get any better anytime soon. So getting this information out there is more important than ever. And who better to talk about teaching to teachers than Bertha Vazquez? Bertha is a former teacher herself. I guess you continue to be a teacher. You don't stop being a teacher. But she is the director of education for the Center for Inquiry. So everybody welcome Bertha Vazquez.
Hello, everybody, and thank you very much, Jim. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here.
Okay, fantastic.
And, oh, you know what? Let me make sure that my sound is on, because I did that right the first time. Yep, share sound. And we are ready to go. Well, thank you. And I'm here to talk about teaching climate change, not specifically about climate change. And boy, is this a tricky subject for teachers. I have a book out February 25th called What Teachers Want to Know About Teaching Climate Change. It is by Corwin Press. I had a couple co-authors with me, and I'm going to talk about that book today. I now run these 3 programs for the Center for Inquiry: TIE, Science Saves, and Generation Skeptics. But I'm mainly here today to talk about my former life, my life as a middle school science teacher. I taught science mostly in the same school, George Washington Carver Middle School in Miami, Florida, for 33 years. But I had a 35-year career. And as you can see from these pictures, I taught a lot of different things, okay? In the top middle there, you can see me sharing a fossil with biology kids. The girls on the top right are running cars down ramps and calculating acceleration and speed. Girls bottom left are making a colloid. Bottom center, those kids are testing magnetism and different physical properties. And the boys in the bottom left are doing different math calculations, conversions from kilometers to miles and things like that. So I taught a whole heck of a lot of stuff. And I taught middle school. So I got a lot of this kind of silliness too. And I tell you what, I loved it. I loved teaching, and I loved this kind of silliness. But the most important thing for me throughout my entire career was teaching about environmental science and teaching as what Alexander von Humboldt would say, the beauty of nature and how all of it is connected. And here I am planting a tree on the school campus with some students many years ago. The kids did science fair every year, and I made sure as many projects as I could were connected with environmental education. Every student in my class for 2 decades wrote a paper on alternative energy where they compared the cost per kilowatt hour and where in the world these different alternative energies are being used, the problem with fossil fuels, etc. Every student in my class for decades also created an FPL, that's a Florida Power and Light account, with their parents and monitored their electricity bills. As you can see from here, you're looking at South Florida because August and May, those in this particular graph were high months because of the air conditioning. And this started spreading to the different parts of the school. I'm not going to show you this whole video, but every sixth grader at the school had to make a video about climate change.
Wonderful day at the beach. I'm a fishy. Ow, what's happening? Hello, guys. That's my movie to tell you about climate change. Huh, I'm just kidding. Climate change is not funny. And while it is real, it will not happen that fast. First, what is it? It is the heating of the Earth's atmosphere.
All right, I'll leave it there because it goes on for a couple minutes, but every kid did that. And here you have a language arts teacher, Mr. Redman. The language arts department started using climate change as a theme in literature. Here's the art department. They started making art out of trash and recycled materials. This is the German teacher, Frau Sturzel, talking about how she had a pen pal program with German students in Germany, and the kids compared German energy policy with American energy policy. On the left, the computer teacher got involved and put in some different wiring. On the right, we had students making solar ovens. The parents of the school donated gardens, donated rain barrels. There was a water bottle drive across the school. The custodians got involved because we can't, of course, the teachers can't control things like the lighting and the window stripping and the door stripping, so the custodians got involved. We even had a private company donate to pay the roof of our buildings white, which we noticed saved us 5% of our energy costs. The year we did this, a big year, was over a decade ago now. We received monthly electric bills, and we noticed that over the course of a year, the school saved $52,000. Another teacher at another school figured out that if the entire Miami-Dade County public school system did what Carver did, and these were simple changes, the school system could save $30 million. Remember, Miami-Dade County is, I think, the fourth largest school district in the country, so we're talking a lot of money. We went beyond the school. These are my students meeting with airport officials at Miami International Airport. We also met with the school board and made recommendations for changes at that level as well. We caught the attention of Lynn Cherry. Lynn Cherry is a filmmaker, and she made this film called Young Voices for the Planet. That's her film series, and ours was called Dreaming in Green. These were the 4 stars of the film, my students. And as you can see on the right there, the school district gave us our energy bills, and we were figuring out the changes month per month. For example, that month was a 26% drop in kilowatt hours. And eventually this caught the attention of the New York Times. And I think the big reason it caught the attention of the New York Times is I live in Florida. Florida, like 49 states in our country, has no climate standards in the state science standards or any content standards. So the question was, how do you teach it? How do you teach climate change if it's actually not in the standards? And that caught the attention of Corwin. And Corwin's a wonderful publishing company. A wonderful editor reached out to me. Her name is Debbie Harden. She got these two other teachers on board. That's Lauren Madden, top, and Kimmy Waite. And the four of us, because Debbie was very involved with the project. The four of us wrote this book, Teaching What Teachers Want to Know About Teaching Climate Change. It's going to be released by Corwin on February 25th. Teaching about climate change. Well, I realized when I decided to do this webinar, I know most of you are not teachers. I'm assuming that this is a general SI crowd. And I want to tell you that the last Skeptical Inquiry Presents, that's the cover. There I am in my little chalkboard there. And some of the letters to the editor we got back made me realize that the people, if you're not in the classroom, it might be a little challenging to understand what teachers are going through and the perceptions of teachers about climate change. So I wanted to give you some data about that. 60% of teachers, when interviewed in 2023, felt unprepared to integrate climate change lessons into their core classes. 60%. This one is mind-blowing to me. Most teachers dedicate only 1 to 2 hours per year to climate change education. Now, mind you, if it's not in the standards and you don't actually have to teach it, I guess that kind of makes sense. Only one state, and Lauren, one of my co-authors, is in that state. New Jersey is the only state in our country that explicitly includes the teaching of climate change in its state standards. I looked into some data for the book and also for this webinar. Let me share some with you to give you a better idea about what's going on. They asked teachers, please tell us about your coursework and continuing education in this topic. Well, look at that number. Close to 60% of teachers said they had no formal instruction on climate change in their classes to become teachers. And in terms of continuing education classes, in other words, teachers going back to get more points to be able to recertify their teaching licenses, 71% said, no, I've never actually had formal instruction on climate change. This one said, why don't you teach climate change? So this is asking the 55% of teachers who responded that they did not teach climate change in their classrooms, why? Now, I've put red arrows on the ones that we wanted to address in the book. What if you don't have state standards? What if you or your students don't believe in climate change? What if you don't have the resources or you don't know enough about it? Maybe your students are too young, and that's where Kimmy comes in because she was a master elementary school teacher for a while. And then it's not related to the subject I teach. We thought we can address these issues in the book. Now, this is an interesting statistic about what the difference is between teachers who teach climate change and who don't teach climate change. For example, have a look at, there should be state laws in place that require teaching climate change. Of the teachers who teach it, 70% agree with that. But the one I really want to point out to you, because it lends to the complexity of this issue, is I worry about parent complaints when it comes to teaching climate change. The numbers are so close between the two groups of teachers. And I have to say, if you had asked me that question, I would have said yes to that because I did get some complaints. Now, this is the surprising thing. When we started working on the book, multiple studies over and over, we kept checking this data. 80 to 86% of parents have said, yes, I want climate change taught in schools. I'll tell you what, that was a surprise to me. And I think it was a surprise to my editor, Debbie Harden, because she kept asking me to check that number. And here's another issue then. If we're not getting a lot of content or education teaching climate change, there's going to be a lot of misunderstanding, confusion, and outright incorrect knowledge based on the teachers. Look at the teachers. How many teachers think that it's not happening? Or how many teachers think that it's natural causes or both humans and nature? This is an issue. This is an issue because there is a consensus. There is a scientific consensus. 97% of climate scientists agree that we are causing global warming. And it's not because they all get together and decide this and that's it. No, it's based on the evidence all across the world, over and over and over again. Evidence coming from multiple lines explaining that this is something that is being human caused. But look at these two numbers. When teachers were asked what percentage of scientists say that it's mostly caused by human activities, 21% of teachers said, I don't know. I don't know what percentage of scientists think it's mostly caused by human activities. 39% of teachers got it right. 81 to 100% of scientists think that climate change is being caused by us. That, my friends, is called a consensus gap. A consensus gap is when there's a discrepancy between the actual level of agreement among scientists on a particular issue and public perception. So the public often believes, in this case, that there's much less of a consensus that actually exists. The consensus gap here is pretty big. It's 58%. Now, I know we're not going to reach the teachers who just straight out don't believe climate change is happening. What we want to reach are those middle of the road teachers, right? We want to reach the teachers that if you tell them, actually, it's 97% the consensus, and probably higher, you're going to get the moderates. You're going to get the people who just, oh, wow, I just didn't know it was that high. Now, one of the things I'm going to talk about is the complexity of this issue compared to some of the other things that we teach. Part of it is the political kerfuffle, shall I say, around this issue. This is a great book called Miseducation about the problem with the way climate is presented and perceived by the general public and how that pervades the classroom. For example, 8,000 teachers across the country received this booklet from the Heartland Institute. It's the Heartland Institute is funded mainly by the oil industry. I think Naomi Oreskes did a wonderful job explaining that in her book. And 8,000 teachers around the country, including me, received this gorgeous glossy booklet that came with a DVD, if I recall, telling me that, they're not really sure about it. So this is what we've got going on. We have a lack of training. Teachers themselves have said that. There's a complexity of the issue. It's not an easy issue to teach. And we also have the time constraints. We don't have a lot of time to stray from our state standards. And of course, it's a controversial topic. So the first thing we decided to do was give teachers some content. We felt that if you wanted content, there's plenty of books to go to, but we did include some chapters on content. Another big factor is climate anxiety. A lot of young people are very worried about the future. And you can't just walk into class and say, oh, we're all going to hell in a handbasket and there's fire and there's hurricanes and this is a terrible thing and nobody's doing anything about it. You cannot walk into a classroom and do that. So one of the ways that you combat that is give students agency and give them healthy ways to engage in the issue. And that was one of Kimmy's chapters. Now let me talk about time constraints. Why can't we just teach it? Why? Well, look what I did, right? We went absolutely gangbusters at my school, but I had to work within a system, okay? So day to day, a lot of times, and I don't know if I could do this today the way I did it back then, because there's a lot of day-to-day lesson planning that's set by the school district and the almighty exams, the almighty assessments now at the end of the year. All those things that we did, that was before my classes had state tests. I don't know if I can spend as much time as I did. And mind you, I wove it into my state standards. I wasn't like straying from what I was supposed to teach. But now it's really harder to do that. And it's harder because we have to, in a sense, teach to the test. Let me explain what I mean. Have a look at these dates. I know they're 3 years old, but hasn't changed. A teacher has 10 days if you see your children every day, or 5 days if you see them every other day. And the dates are set. These are the dates that you have to teach the following things. Now, you don't have to read all of that, But in those 10 one-hour sessions, you have to cover all of those things. And in my school district, they give you suggestions to help you. Okay, they're not forcing these on you, but say, hey, if you're teaching, spend 2 days on this, spend 2 days on this, spend 2 days on this. And then you have to give the district assessment at the end. If we're supposed to follow this so closely, that's why it's impossible to add something new to the curriculum. I often hear people say, oh, kids need to learn about bicycle safety, and kids need to learn stranger danger, and kids need to say no to drugs, and they should know about this, and they should know about that, and the teachers need to cover that. I think teachers need to cover critical thinking. Oh my God, I hear that one a lot as a Center for Inquiry education director. Yes, we do, but when? There's a time constraint. So what we proposed in the book is integrating it. How do you incorporate climate change into lessons if it's not a standard? How do you weave it into language arts, math, religion classes? How do you connect it to the national teaching standards? And of course, we had a New Jersey expert aboard to compare the rest of the states to New Jersey. Let me show you where I placed it in, because at this point you're saying, well, how did you do it? This is the Florida site for state standards. And I found these two standards and I said, oh boy, I could really weave it in there. Okay. How do humans impact the environment? And how is energy transformed from one form to another and into work? Let me show you. We have to cover how plants and animals, including humans, impact the surface of the earth or the environment. We studied all of these things, and my favorite thing was the students found an environmental success story somewhere in the world, and they had to Photoshop themselves into that environmental success story. So there's a 6th grader in my class who has Photoshopped himself into a trash pickup in Mumbai, India. So they're learning how humans impact the environment, and you can clearly talk about climate change there. And you're giving them agency, albeit in a very small way, to make an impact. The other way, and my favorite way to do it, was how energy is transferred from one form to another. I loved talking about how you burn, by the way, no student knows how they make electricity. Over and over and over and over again, I asked students, okay, you love electricity. You have iPhones and computers and refrigerators and air conditioning and all of this stuff. How do we make electricity? I don't think I ever got a student to answer my question. The idea that you light oil on fire, you heat oil, which heats water, which boils the water, which produces steam, which then you use to turn the copper wire magnet, which we call a generator, to produce a stream of electrons, was just beyond them. And I had these flashlights in my classroom, and I showed them that if you spin a magnet around a copper wire, you spin a copper wire around a magnet, you produce a stream of electrons that you can then transfer that energy to electrical energy. This blew their mind. So then I thought, okay, is there another way to do this? Well, let's talk wind. It blew their mind. And all you have to do is, that's what the wind is doing. That's what the wind energy is doing, right? You're spinning, the blades are going around and up in there. What do you got? What do you have? Copper wire magnet thingy, they would yell. Copper wire magnet thingy. And that can produce a stream of electrons. Of course, solar is a little more complicated. It's not exactly, that's not how solar does it. But they got the whole idea. Once you start talking about electrons and atoms, hey, there's another place you could stick it in your standards. It worked. And then, of course, there's data. We have to teach x-axis, y-axis, look at the data, see the trends. And instead of doing, the amount of weight my dog gains over 3 months to analyze data and see how a graph works, well, you can use climate data. So there is another way to put it in. And these are Florida standards that I'm showing you in the blue boxes, but any state pretty much covers that. Now, this is the chapter I was most excited about as the education director for CFI, the politics of climate change. And Richard Feynman's favorite quote, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. We propose in the book that from day one, Oh yeah, and remember, 80 to 86% of parents want us to do this. This is what's interesting. When I ask teachers, what is critical thinking? I got a bunch of stuff. I asked a lot of teachers. They said, well, critical thinking is analyzing data and drawing conclusions and problem solving and evaluating evidence. But no, nobody talked about misinformation. Nobody talked about how our own biases, lived experiences, perceptions, tribal identities affect misinformation. Nobody talked about how the fact that all these, and if you go on social media, a lot of these social media posts are not made by humans. As a matter of fact, only once did a teacher say critical thinking includes identifying personal biases, includes identifying flaws in your own thinking, why we fall for misinformation. I concluded that teachers are missing one component of what we call epistemic vigilance. Teachers are pretty good at teaching kids to evaluate the source of the information, and they're pretty good at teaching kids to evaluate the claim of the information. What they're not so good at is evaluating the receiver, you and me, and how we process new information. So in the book, we're saying, don't start this when you start your unit on climate change or you start your day or two on climate change. Start this from the first day of school. Let me tell you about these wonderful teachers with me here in this photograph. In the front with the purple hair is Anna Driggs, a master teacher, and in the pinkish hair, that's Ellie Valdez. If you have a child in middle school, you want these ladies to be their middle school science teachers. Some of the best teachers. I was just honored to work with them for decades. But I'll tell you what, they followed and I followed what's called the information deficit model. Oh, little child in my class, you don't believe in climate change? Let me tell you why you're wrong. And I would give them facts and I would show them forest fires or the change in the ocean temperatures and the ice core data and all of that. And do you know what I've realized since working at CFI? Facts don't really change minds because they're not individual units in our brains. We have a web of belief. And if I want to change minds, I have to change the whole paradigm for that child or the whole web of belief in their brains. And the only way to do that is to start from the beginning of the year. Start by saying, this is why we need a scientific method, because our thinking is flawed. And a scientific method puts guardrails in place to reduce the biases, the flaws, the perceptions, the motivations of us, the humans. We wanted to say, hey, you think you're thinking with the logical side of your brain. Well, the logical side of the brain is that rider, that girl on the top of the elephant. But you're riding an elephant, and that elephant is your emotions. Do you think you're controlling that elephant? No. That elephant represents your biases and your past experiences, the wisdom you've received from your tribe, your parents, etc. And so remember that when you get new information, you may not be thinking logically about it. We said, why do you want to believe that it's real, climate change or evolution or Bigfoot or whatever it is, or why, or you don't want to believe it, and why? How emotionally connected are you to these topics that we're talking about? What motivations do you have for believing what you believe? This is not a lesson that you do on one day. This is something that you do across the year. So that when you get to evolution, or you get to a supposedly, allegedly controversial topic like climate change, the kids are thinking about their thinking. And are they being emotional? Are they repeating what they heard at home? Why do they want to believe this? It sure is easier not to believe in climate change. It's easier to sleep if you think about it. It's okay to be wrong. Oh my goodness, as science teachers, we need to stress this. When we were wrong about something in class, I'm like, how exciting! We can learn something new today. Stress the importance of intellectual humility. Scientists don't set out to prove themselves right. They set up experiments to prove themselves wrong. And that is something you could do every day in your classroom whenever you're designing experimental design. Make them realize the difference between reasoning and rationalizing. Follow the evidence to a logical conclusion, or select the evidence that justifies your conclusion. We all rationalize. Get kids thinking about thinking before you hit the climate change. And yeah, science works. The process of science is proven time and time again to be the best possible way at arriving at valid understandings. By the way, that t-shirt, I found it in the CFI store. So these are the types of habits of mind that we're stressing in chapter 4. And I think I'm excited because I think it might be the first time in a climate change book for teachers that we talk about the types of things that students need to be thinking about their thinking before you even introduce science topics. Why do we know that the sun is the center of the solar system? Why do we know that we should wash our hands before we eat or operate on somebody? It's this process of science, this trial and error, and designing experiments to prove ourselves wrong instead of right, that has led us to all of this understanding. And of course, introduce them to the evil twins, science denial and pseudoscience. Now, I know you're thinking, this is great, Bertha. This is so interesting. I had no idea that most teachers dedicate an hour or two of climate content per year. I didn't know that teachers didn't realize there was a scientific consensus. But I'm not in the classroom. I mean, I can buy your book for a friend who's in the classroom, but how can I help you? Well, I'll tell you what, that year when we saved $52,000, I could never, that was absolutely exhausting. I could never do that again. And I would have, the only reason I was able to do it is because I had a lot of help. You can talk to your school district officials. You can reach out to them. You can leave emails. You can make phone calls and say, hey, teachers need to get training in climate science. Offer your time. Ask, is there an environmental chair or sustainability chair in our district? Push the fact that your state should have, when we review the standards of your state, the science standards of your state, which come up for review periodically, push the fact that, hey, look at New Jersey. They've already added climate change standards across the board. Maybe we should add climate change standards to our state. And by the way, New Jersey didn't just add it to science. New Jersey added it to all of these topics. Maybe you're really good at this topic. One of the letters to the editor about the article that I wrote for Skeptical Inquirer, the guy clearly had a lot, I mean, I'd say PhD knowledge about climate change. Please offer to help. Maybe you can talk about climate change to those classrooms. And how about taking it out of the classroom? Maybe Sierra Club or the Audubon Society. I love Citizens Climate Lobby, for example, where the kids can learn all about civic engagement. You can also talk about careers. Because of the 2 acts passed by the Biden-Harris administration, we have nearly 300,000 new jobs in 2022 in solar energy, 114,000 in renewables and zero emission technologies. Clean energy jobs grew by 3.9%, and the solar sector gained over 263,000 workers across the US. The idea that you can either protect the environment or protect the economy is a false proposition. It is wrong, okay? It's almost like the horse breeders stopping the automobile or candle makers stopping the light bulb. This is the future of our economy. It's very exciting. And they can be in the same lane, the economy of our nation and environmental sustainability. Citizen science projects are fantastic. That's where citizens help scientists collect data and send the data to the scientists. Find the ones locally in your community. They're also called community science projects. And maybe put a teacher in touch with them. I want to end with this amazing school Mast Academy, that's Miami downtown in the distance, they did, I'd say, even more amazing stuff than we did. Okay. And it all had to do with parent involvement. The environmental chair of the Miami-Dade County Council's Parent Teacher Association organized a Green Champions Club at the school, took the pressure off the teachers. The students put together a resolution and they asked the school district to commit to 100% clean energy by 2030. The school board of Miami-Dade County passed it unanimously. Again, this is the fourth largest school district in the country. And what's even cooler, I think, is that in August 2023, Miami-Dade County schools received 20 electric buses. They are the first of 125 electric buses that they'll have on the road by next year, 2026. This was mainly not by teachers. This was by people outside of the school coming in and helping the teachers. So another thing, once again, here's our book, and it is on the Corwin site, and Raven 25 will give you 25% off. It is for teachers, so if you're not a teacher, I don't know, you may not find it that interesting, but if you have teachers in your life or a teacher nearby that teaches your children, maybe, I don't know, give them a copy. We're pretty excited about the book. And again, these are the CFI education programs. As you can see, climate change isn't there, but you know I snuck it into Generation Skeptics on more than one occasion. There's multiple climate lessons in Generation Skeptics if teachers are looking for free lessons. And our book is chock full of resources for teachers to teach climate. And that's all I have for you.
All right. Thank you, Bertha. We have some questions, but I want to start out with one because I know, in the last several years, you've been doing similar teaching teachers how to teach evolution.
Yeah.
And you've had seminars in a lot of different states. Is anything like that going to be happening for climate change, or is it just evolution?
Well, evolution's the big one for the Center for Inquiry. I have 3 lessons under Generation Skeptics that have to do with misconceptions around climate change. There's a lesson that's, you have to really know your kids and you have to really know your parents. There's a lesson called Follow the Money Trail, where we look at statements made by different organizations about climate change. Yes, it's happening. No, it's not happening. And they follow the money. Who's giving these organizations money? And they realize that the oil industry is behind a lot of the false claims, but they're hiding behind a front group like the Heartland Institute or the Cato Institute. Talk about critical thinking. Talk about the heart of the Center for Inquiry. But you got to be a little brave to do that lesson. You might, that's one that I'd be a little nervous because, you might get some pushback from parents. So there are climate lessons in the Generation Skeptics program, and I've actually done workshops using these lessons.
Great. Okay, Mark had a question because you gave a statistic about parents wanting teachers to teach climate change. Where did you get that? How'd you get that statistic?
Oh, gosh, I could open my book and find it. That was like consistent over and over and over. I found that we have multiple sources for that statistic. It was shocking to me. I thought it was much lower. And when the first time I wrote that in the chapter, my editor wrote back and was like, "Are you sure about this? Are you sure about this?" So I know it's correct. I could look it up, but it wouldn't be difficult for them to look it up. Like what percentage of parents want teachers to teach this? They'll see that's the number consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think people, I love that whole idea that gap between, what all the scientists teach and what the public thinks. That's really, science really has not been good traditionally in getting ideas across to the average person.
Yeah.
There is this gap.
And in all fairness, there's a lot of people out there muddying the water, merchants of doubt, as Naomi Oreskes calls them. And the average person is just, living their lives. The average teacher that's just getting their kids to the soccer practice and getting home and grading the papers and making dinner for the family. If you're not on this topic, it's easy to be confused. I don't really blame the public sometimes.
Yeah. Peter wants to know, basically, who decides what is taught in education?
So you have a committee. So I don't know. I think Florida, for example, is coming up for review. It's anybody can apply to be on a committee, and it's called a standards review committee. And it's mainly teachers, retired teachers, there's scientists, etc. And they will review the state standards and they'll make recommended changes. And those are adopted by the state's Board of Education. So, for example, when I started working with ties, evolution was not really taught in a lot of middle school standards across the country. But little by little, we've seen I don't know what's going to happen, what's happening. There's a trend now a little bit in the opposite direction, but more and more states adopted middle school evolution standards. So if you compare middle school evolution standards like the year 2000 versus the year 2019, you're going to see much better evolution standards. So it's a committee made mainly of teachers, scientists, administration, and they review the standards and they make changes.
But
State by
those,
state. Now, I'm sorry to
yeah,
interrupt you. There's about 23 states, if I'm not mistaken, that have adopted the next generation science standards, and those are national standards. And then there's a few states like I'm drawing a blank right now, like Florida, we don't have next generation science standards, but our standards reflect them pretty closely. But we do not have national standards across the whole country.
yeah, but a lot of countries do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
they set the standards for the entire nation.
We are very state-based, which is strange in a way because you could be getting a much stronger education in one state than the other based on the science standards. And the thing with climate change is like whenever I get a teacher who says to me, "Oh, I got this letter from a parent saying that I should teach creationism alongside evolution," I say, "Oh, not to worry. You tell them you're teaching your state's standards. And if they have a problem with that they need to go to the next level." Teachers are by nature non-confrontational. We are risk averse. So by punting the ball, basically saying, "So it's not up to me, it's the state standards," it makes it easier for teachers to teach evolution. Unfortunately, in terms of climate change, we don't have that backup unless you're in New Jersey.
Yeah, it takes the heat off of them individually. Okay, so Dan wants to know, are any of these techniques for talking to kids about this stuff? You see any ways for getting this to the adult population?
For sure. And I highly recommend the stuff we're doing at the Center for Inquiry. And I also recommend Melanie Tresick King's site, Thinking is Power. She and I are talking about collaborating on a college class that she's pretty much developed already to get people thinking about their thinking. And yes, absolutely, I agree that this is as important for me and you as it is for 13 and 14-year-olds. But I
Yeah,
think as adults, we should model the behavior. I remember saying all the time in class, like, "Oh, I used to think this and I was wrong, and that's okay." People don't like saying that, but it's kind of freeing to say that.
yeah, there was a great book called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by
Not by
Me.
me. I read that like 2 weeks ago. Somebody recommended it. A teacher recommended it at a Generation Skeptics workshop when we actually talked about climate change, by the way. Carol Tavris, I believe.
Yeah, she's out here and has spoken for us. And it's just a great reminder that, our sort of evolutionary inclinations are to, believe things strongly that and not think too hard about them, and then resist when it comes to changing our minds.
Yeah. Anna Driggs, the teacher with the purple hair, who doesn't really have purple hair, she was a master getting kids to think about environmental science. And I know in my case too, many kids come back and say, "I'm studying environmental science thanks to you." I'm a solar engineer thanks to you. But neither one of us were that good at changing the minds of kids who walked in thinking there's no such thing as climate change. And that's because we were using that information deficit model. We were saying, "Oh, you don't believe it? Let me give you facts." Doesn't work. You have to work on the whole mindset.
Yeah, and to pry people out of their inclination thinking that they're right and they don't have to listen to anything else.
Yeah, and ourselves too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well,
It's
we say
happened
on
to
the
me.
golf course, we say every slice is an opportunity to learn.
Oh gosh, I'm really learning a lot when I play golf then because I slice a lot.
Mark wants to know, is there a Kindle version of your book or will there be?
There will be a digital version, and that's on the Corwin website, which I believe Eric placed in the chat.
Okay, yeah, look in the chat for that. Our old pal and short-term editor of Skeptical Inquirer magazine, Stuart Weiss, wants to know.
Hi,
He says
Stuart.
his daughter is a high school English teacher. Is there any way to get this in the English curriculum?
Yes, I think one excellent way to get it, and there's a couple chapters in the book. The chapters written by Lauren Madden are all about the standards. For example, article comparison, article analysis. That's language arts is all about identifying, evaluating the claim, evaluating the source, and yes, evaluating the receiver. So you could there's sites where you have fakeish news about climate, and then you have real news about climate. Where is it coming from? Who wrote it? What are their motivations? Who do they work for? Are they getting paid by, Exxon Mobil? And that's all in the like journalism and language arts department. All that kind of article analysis.
Yeah, and the fact that pretty much any words that come out of our mouths are going to be naturally at least this tiny bit slanted in one direction or another, just because of the way we think.
Yeah, and I mean, to me, my elephant is it's not so much the biases or the identities, it's the emotion. When I read an article that tells me it's not really happening or the hurricanes aren't getting, I immediately get triggered by that. And you know what? I got to stop and read it. And then maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe they have good points. But I tend to ignore those things that anger my elephant. And I think we all need to learn to take a step back. It's almost a form of mindfulness, take a step back and read the article, evaluate the source, and evaluate how it's hitting you as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
That's
I,
big in language arts, I would say.
yeah, and just like, yeah, exactly, rhetoric and that sort of thing. I had an uncle who would get me so pissed off about certain subjects that I couldn't think anymore. I was just so a ball of emotion. There was no more logic left.
Yeah, my emotions don't work well for me sometimes. It's taken me a while to change my mind on things because I just don't want to know what the other side thinks. And sometimes the other side's right. Not in
Yeah,
terms of climate change, mind you, but in terms of other things.
yeah. Don's concerned about that climate change is a very complex issue, and maybe it boils down to like a physics level
Yeah.
understanding of what's going on. At what point can you start getting to kids at that level?
Well, yeah, and I think that's what teachers are really good at is understanding the cognitive level of their students. And so a simple experiment that I did with fourth graders is we took two, and kids love like scientific equipment, that makes them happy when you bring it to their class. I had two flasks, and I know we should have had hundreds, but we had two flasks. We dropped Alka-Seltzer in them so there was carbon dioxide gas, and we put them both next to a lamp like this one, measuring the temperature. And what the kids noticed is the flask with the carbon dioxide in it stayed hotter much longer than the flask without the Alka-Seltzer having been released without the carbon dioxide gas. That's basic. I think the first person to do that, it was a woman, and she's in chapter 1, and I don't remember her name right now. That was in the 1800s. They figured that carbon dioxide traps heat. So something as simple as that can be done with younger kids.
Yeah. Okay, great. Our old friend Jerry Dantone wants to know, what happens if you mix the teaching of critical thinking and climate change together? Do you get any political or parental pushback from that?
I'm going to say it depends, I guess. You have to know your students. I didn't care. I was going to do it anyway, but I have a very good grasp on the content. And what happens is if the teacher, as you saw by the statistics, if they don't have a good grasp of the content, they're going to be less inclined to teach it because they're scared of parent pushback. That's why it's so important to mention the fact that most parents want this. If they do get parent pushback, I always say to teachers, reach out to your administration, reach out to your peers, have them help you. But my point is, don't teach critical thinking when you hit the climate change stuff. Start teaching how science works and why the scientific method absolutely rocks from day one. So that when you get to climate change or evolution or some of these other controversial, within quotes, topics, the kids already understand the science behind it and why it's not about, I believe in evolution. It's, well, the evidence all points towards evolution, or the evidence all points, all of these points of evidence point towards the fact that we're warming the atmosphere and the planet. Start from day one, dropping little hints constantly. Don't wait till you get to the controversial topics.
Okay, thank you. David, I'm going to modify David's question. You have the double-edged sword of both knowing a lot about climate change and how climate works, and living in the state that is closest to the surface of the ocean on average, I believe. How do
Yeah.
you deal? How do you deal with climate anxiety?
Yeah, it's a fine line. Actually, I was in NPR. There's an article out there, How to Teach Climate Change Without Scaring Your Students Half to Death. I was interviewed by NPR for that. What you do is you give them agency. That's the reason we did everything at the school, at my school. I gave them agency because it helps them, makes them not helpless. Because if not, kids are going to go from knowledge to absolute despair. So that's why you have clubs. That's why you do small things in the classroom. That's why you try to give them citizen science projects, etc. The other thing I stressed, by the way, is this is an opportunity to save money, because that gets some of the parents on board. One of the young girls in the picture holding the different equipment that the video of Young Voices for the Planet, the girl dressed in orange, her husband, or sorry, she was in 8th grade, no husband. Although I had an 8th grader once who was married, but that's a totally different story. Long time ago, different school. But her father did not believe in climate change. He owned a huge building in downtown Miami, and his daughter convinced him to change all the AC units. The man saved thousands of dollars. He didn't care about the trees in the Everglades or the polar bears, but man, his bottom line mattered. So it depends who you're talking to, right? You could always forget the polar bears and the trees. Talk about how much money you can save. I had students on the local news. They saved when they did that FPL audit, and the Florida Power and Light comes to your house and does an audit of your house for free. I had one student who lives nearby here saved $200 a month on her parents' FPL bill. Mom was all in about climate. Dad was, I don't believe in climate change, but he didn't care. He was saving $200 a month. So that's another angle I think that teachers can use, is the economic possibility here. That really works. But in terms of answering the climate anxiety, you pretend you're not anxious and you give the students as much agency as possible. And there's a couple chapters on that in the book. Different projects that you could do with your students to give them that agency.
And there may be eventually, larger solutions that we as a species are going to have to hop to in order to solve this. I know Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about anytime someone talks about terraforming Mars, he's like, terraforming Mars, we can just terraform Earth
Yeah.
and save Earth without having to travel millions of miles and do the same thing.
I have the students investigate different solutions, geoengineering and that kind of stuff. That's another way to reduce anxiety. It's not will we do those things, it's when we do those things. The carbon sequestration, carbon capture, that kind of thing is definitely, it's not just solar or just nuclear or reduce carbon emissions of cars. It's all together.
Okay, last question from Mark. And we in the skeptic business have been hearing about this for years, and it's a great thought. The idea of teaching our side to be better rhetoricians and better persuaders through storytelling.
Yeah.
That whole idea of breaking into these other subjects is a great idea. Can you make that the last word on that?
Yes, and I'm glad that that's the last word because every chapter has success stories. We ask teachers to send us questions and tips, but we ask them to send us success stories, and they're wonderful. And I always say that's another great way to start a lesson on climate change or anything is with a story. Goes back to evolution, right? We sat around the fire and one of our tribal leaders told us a story. And so absolutely. Success stories, talking when you talk to people, talk about the lowering of your electric bill or talk about how much money you're saving with your electric car or whatever. And that's more persuasive than how many parts per million of carbon dioxide are we finding in the atmosphere every year. Absolutely.
Yeah. Bertha, thanks so much for talking today and for all your work in arming the teachers of the United States with all this information. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. And I'm glad you're my host. It's like sitting with a friend and having a cup of coffee.
There's other people out there, I guess, but it doesn't matter. Thanks everyone else for tuning in. Check out that new Point of Inquiry podcast and watch out for the next Skeptical Inquirer Presents. Thanks, everybody.